It's Friday the 13th, the perfect day to talk about the Commander-in-Chief, the Don himself, the man on fire, or rather, the man who fires, in more ways than one. Let's get started.
You guys know what this represents?
Tell us, sir.
Maybe it's the calm before the storm.
What's the storm?
Could be the calm before the storm.
What storm?
We have the world's great military people in this room, I will tell you that. And we're going to have a great evening. Thank you all for coming.
What storm, Mr. President?
You'll find out.
Give us an instant.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
No, it doesn't. I have a lot of joy in my life, and I feel very blessed to be there every day fighting for the things I'm fighting for. It's a lot of responsibility to do the jobs that we have, but I'd say more invigorated by it. I think that it's obviously the challenge of a lifetime, and again, like I said, every day we're in the arena, we're fighting forward, and I think when people look back, a lot of people get caught in the day-to-day, and they look at maybe some of the more colorful personalities, but one of the big blessings of this is we work with so many incredible people, and you have obviously you've got the waves and the action above, but then you have everything that's happening below the water where it's calm and everything's moving forward. And this president's hired and attracted so many incredibly talented people who care about this country, who want to make things better, and who aren't afraid to make the tough decisions. And I think that when this presidency's over, you'll look at the full body of work and you'll see that a lot of progress is made on a lot of fronts. Maybe they don't get covered every day on CNN, but I think you'll see a lot of progress.
Well, I'm looking forward to that day when that presidency is come to its end. Let me ask you: are we going to beat you in the midterms, Democrats?
I don't know. I mean, I see mixed data. The data that we look at shows that it's all about the turnout models. So I think people who have different turnout models will show different things. But one thing I've learned is I wouldn't bet against Trump. He's a black swan. He's been a black swan all of his life. And I just see in politics and business, I just don't like betting against him.
In 2018, I bought my very first tarot deck, The Wild Unknown Tarot by Kim Kranz. I just fell in love with the artwork, and I was interested in the concept. And tarot honestly gives me the opportunity to tap into my more intuitive side rather than focusing mostly on my logical and analytical mind. But I was drawing cards for different people, and for Trump, I drew this card, the Father of Cups, the Black Swan, the diplomat. Now, it was interesting because I also got this card for Michael Jackson, and I'll talk about him a little bit later. For Obama, I pulled the Six of Pentacles or Six of Coins reversed. So interpret that how you will. But the point is, it's things like this that, I can't explain scientifically why I pulled this card. And then later in the year, when I watched this interview that I just showed you, Jared Kushner basically related Trump to a black swan. I also found it interesting when Jared Kushner talked about the waves above and the waters below. It reminded me of the concept of the waters above and the waters below. He was basically talking about the different density layers. Trump being a black swan is definitely correct. Although I don't watch the news anymore, it's still obviously very easy to come across certain things. I just hop onto the YouTube homepage and then, of course, breaking news, drones in the sky, right? We'll talk about that a little bit later, as well as aliens. And then I'll make some announcements and website updates. But first, Trump. I ask that you please put any and all political views or personal opinions about Trump to the side for now, and let's explore his esoteric role in this matrix. Stick around to the end, because I am also going to share with you my Iowa report, what I observed under the Iowa State Fairgrounds that I referenced in my last video. So this will be most likely another longer one, so bear with me. Keep an open mind as we discuss the sun and the sun. So here is a depiction, a statue of the sun god Mithras. Now, Mithras is certainly not the oldest rising and dying god, but he's definitely relevant to our discussion today and honestly our world today. He emerges on the winter solstice, and in the following spring, during Taurus season, it is his job to slay the bull. The cult of Mithras was prominent in ancient Rome before Christianity eventually took over as the Roman Empire's dominant religion. Now, Mithras is a humanoid form of an even higher solar deity, himself, his true form, Sol Invictus. And it's interesting because in 2022, around that time, I started seeing weird phenomenon with our sun, not even out of body, just with my own two physical eyes. But I didn't want to acknowledge it at first. I've heard of theories about two suns, but at that time I didn't find any evidence yet. But during the hype of the April 8th eclipse earlier this year, I decided to see what was really going on. I made sure to sleep deprive myself a little bit the night before so that I could astral travel during the eclipse window of my time zone. And I saw some very interesting things. But the most interesting was that, yes, there are indeed two suns. The sun that we see in our sky is actually a sun disk. In ancient Egyptian times, it was known as the Aten. Now, what I basically found out was that this sun disk, this hologram, is a copy and paste image of Alpha Centauri, the Alpha Centauri star system that's 4 light years away in the real universe, of course not in this false construct, but in the real universe. Alpha Centauri. If you look up the star's mass, radius, luminosity, even its age, it's way too similar to our sun. And any other slight differences, in my opinion, are because of the fact that it's not a real sun. What I also observed is that behind this sun disk, this Aten, was a dwarf star, the real quote-unquote sun, the hidden sun, the sun behind the sun, which was known in ancient Egypt as Amun-Ra. So we had Ra, but then we had Amun-Ra. And I'll explain a little later what Akhenaten's role in all of this was, removing all of the other Egyptian gods and bringing in the Aten. Now, there are two ways that I confirm this, because again, I like to get my research from the out-of-body experience, corroborated with evidence that I get from researching the esoteric, but I also like to look at science and what science says about all this. So there exists a hidden sun behind our sun disk. But there's a problem, and it's called the solar neutrino problem. Basically, scientists in the 1960s were trying to measure how many neutrinos, one of these subatomic particles, were coming out of the sun. They, again, used the standard model and hypothesized what to expect, but when they actually ran the test, they got back 40% less neutrinos than what they expected. But this is actually expected because the sun that I saw, again, was a dwarf, and he's definitely less than half the size of the sun that we see. So the standard model is technically wrong because we're basing it off of a sun that is a copy and paste image of another star. The second way I confirmed this was by coming across this historical record of the 1561 celestial event over Nuremberg. Now, I actually went out of body to see what happened here, and I'll leave a link in the description about this event. You can see the drawing from the people who lived during that time and recorded the event. They reported that they saw this celestial solar event, and then it was very hard to follow, but one of the prominent things that most of the witnesses claimed was that there was this giant black spear in the sky. Now, when I went to look at it, I immediately go, that's a mouse. That is a mouse. Like the mouse cursor or the mouse clicker. But instead of a white one that we usually see, it's the black one that you can see on, for example, a Word document or whatever. It was a giant mouse cursor, basically, a mouse pointer. And, you know, it's one of those things where I had to go like, we are really inside a giant computer. Or it's a regular sized computer and we're just really small. It was one of those things that took me a very long time to process. And it was, again, like I said in my last video, it was quite a grieving process. So what do these two suns have to do with Trump? The sun that we usually see in the sky, and then the sun behind the sun, who is actually less than half the size of the sun that we're used to seeing. What does that have to do with Trump? What does that have to do with the Matrix? What does that have to do with our world? It has a lot to do with those things. So as I've said in previous videos, there are several factions at play here, both human factions and elite groups, but also alien factions. Different factions serve a different sun. Some of them, the prominent ones that I'm going to mention today, and how it relates to Trump specifically is, you know, what we see in this geopolitical theater is basically a reenactment of certain astral events that have happened over time. Donald Trump's hit show, The Apprentice, was famous for Trump's catchphrase, "You're fired." What I saw was that after World War II, there were many spirit guides that were former humans, hundreds, sometimes thousands of years ago, that the sun, particularly the sun behind the sun, Amun-Ra, fired from those positions. and they were made to fall all the way down and become humans again. Most of the spirit guides that we observe in these NDE reports are no longer former humans that had ascended into that realm and were then being spirit guides convincing other humans to reincarnate. But now most of the spirit guides that we see are either AI or Greys, reptilians, or some other factions, but usually that's rare. But most of them are AI. And it's extremely difficult for a human to be chosen now to be a spirit guide again, because they want most humans down on Earth. Why did Amun-Ra fire almost all of the human spirit guides? For their failure in preventing the spiritual revolt, as well as the human activities surrounding World War II, particularly the deployment of the nuclear bombs, which I explained how that event was problematic for the Demiurge and his archons. So they were fired and made to come down to Earth. No more staying in the upper astral realm for them. So Trump is a role player. He's playing a role, and he is mimicking the sun, particularly in two major ways: the presidential immunity and the apprentice firing people. But there are still several factions that worship one or the other sun based on what they believe that sun promised them. And I'll explain that in a separate video where I talk about the factions, the different factions, and go more into specific detail. Now, you may wonder, what faction does Trump belong to? So, Trump belongs to one of the more top secret societies. So some people may wonder, is he a Freemason? Is he Illuminati? What I saw is that he's beyond both of those. And it's mainly because, hundreds of years ago, secret societies like Freemasonry and the Illuminati and things like that were actually kind of still a secret. And, we didn't know so much about what kind of practices were going on within the lodges and what their agendas were. Now, in the past, it was more common for men of various economic backgrounds, from various walks of life, to all be in the same secret society and call each other brothers. But as time went on, more and more of the more elite members of these societies wanted to form their own clubs, if you will, separate from the men who were not as financially well off, and have their own sort of more elitist group. And they did this, of course, by having entrance fees that a typical commoner, especially back then, would absolutely have no way of paying. So this created a class barrier. Only people who are of this income bracket can join this certain club. So the name that I got when I was out of body, and I didn't quite understand this at first, but what I got very clearly was Roma Nova. And I was like, Roma Nova? And apparently there are various neo-Roman societies. And I've spoken about the hierarchy in previous videos when I showed the Hindu caste system and the pyramid. And what is shown here is the social hierarchy of the Roman Empire. This picture here depicts it pretty accurately. So at the very top of the pyramid, the apex of the hierarchy, we have Caesar himself and the royal family. Then we have the patricians, or the elders, the senators. Then we have the equestrians. Below that, the plebeians, then the freedmen and the soldiers, and finally on the bottom, the Slavs, right? So I found that Trump belongs to the equestrian group. So he's pretty up there. Now, the equestrians would correspond to the military class of the Hindu caste system that I showed before. But the equestrians don't only serve a military function. Many of them can also be wealthy businessmen, and that fits Trump. And if you look at that name, equestrian, it reminds you of what? Horses, right? Stallions that the cavalry rides in with during a war. Now, in my previous video about top secret societies, I showed the Chinese zodiac and how it actually relates to the 12 tribes of Israel. Please watch that video if you get a chance to know what I'm about to talk about. But basically, Trump would then fit here with, obviously, the horses. I discussed how the 4 caste systems of the hierarchy are split into 12 clans. Trump would belong to the horses, or the stallions, or Pegasus. And this corresponds to the tribe of Levi. Now, that may sound confusing at first. Levi, those were the priests, but I'll explain in a moment. The 4 castes, or classes, of the Indo-Aryan hierarchy can be further divided into the 12 clans. What I would like to introduce in this video is that they can be overall categorized into 2 main branches that I call the red and the white. The red and the white. Now, in the Secret Societies video, I talked about the Yahud and the Yaakov. The Yahud, who serve Yah, and the Yaakov, who wrestle against Yah. Yaakov became Israel, those who fight for the Els, or the Elohim. So again, there's a distinction between El and Yah. He's not the same God in the Old Testament, not at all. To the point where there was an entire struggle between the Yahwists and the Elohists. And you can definitely look this up in any biblical history study. There was most definitely a competition between the Yahwists and the Elohists. So let's get into more detail about the reds and the whites. So what do I mean by the reds and the whites? It is the age-old animosity, betrayal, and rivalry between the red-haired ones with blue eyes and the white-haired ones with yellow, gold, or amber eyes. The ones with red hair, when they eventually came down to 3D, gave rise to people with blonde hair, brown hair, and green, gray, or hazel eyes. The ones that had the white hair eventually gave rise to people with platinum blonde, but that's more rare. They mostly gave rise to people with jet black hair, as well as amber, brown, or black eyes. And for the most part, these beings, these people, have very narrow eyes. Now, the complicated history between the so-called Reds and the so-called Whites were relayed through the telling of various stories. For example, Cain and Abel. Now, Cain represents the farmers, which is another word for the Reds. Abel represents the shepherds, another word for the white-haired ones. The Reds are the firstborn, but they lost their inheritance, and there's 3 different stories why. The Cain and Abel story, but also in the story of Ham and Japheth, as well as the story of Esau and Jacob. As we know from the biblical story in Genesis, Cain slays his brother Abel out of jealousy. They are the sons of Adam, and they had to give offerings to God. Cain offered vegetables, which was rejected. Abel offered meat from his herd that he was shepherding, and that was accepted. So, out of jealousy, according to the story, Cain kills Abel. And because of that, Adam and Eve had to bear another son, Seth. And Cain was driven out to become a wanderer or a vagabond. In the Sons of Noah story, we get another rendition of this. Ham sees his father, Noah, drunk, and he is cursed by his father to basically serve Japheth. But there's another key to this story as well. Remember how it talked about Ham was looking forward and he saw his father, but his brothers were moving backwards to put the cloth or whatever over their father. Now, this situation of, from your viewpoint, seeing everyone else walk backwards, that's actually code for a time traveler. Because if you are going back in time, during that process, everyone around you looks like they are moving in reverse. So, Ham, that whole thing was basically saying that the Hamites are the time travelers. And it was interesting because what I saw was that the Reds were given dominion over time, while the Whites were given dominion over space. You may ask, given by whom? Apparently, their Lord Father, who I equate with the Hindu god Shiva. The Reds and the Whites are the sons and daughters of Lord Shiva. The Reds were first born. The Whites came later. The Whites consider themselves superior to the Reds for various reasons, but mainly because they think of themselves as more refined, whereas the Reds are, according to them, too chaotic and emotional, according to the Whites. And basically, the white-haired ones decreed that the Reds must submit and be subservient to the Whites. So in an ironic way, the Reds are also in a karmic loop, like the rest of humanity is. Some submit, but some rebelled and inspired and at times worked directly with certain human factions like the Nazis to cause discord and disrupt the system. The Reds are chaos bringers, like their father Set, who I equate with Lord Shiva, because one of Shiva's names is Sata. The name of his first wife was Sati. Sati is the wife of Sata, which can be shortened to Sat. Set. And this gave rise to the Sethians. And this also, of course, relates to CERN and how they have a Shiva statue on their company grounds. But anyway, back to the topic. There has been an age-old rivalry between the red-haired ones and the white-haired ones. And most of them work very hard to maintain this animosity between the siblings. But there are other factions that believe if the red and the white came back together and reconciled, that they would literally unite as one and be able to basically get out of this situation where they got stuck on planet Earth. The groups that believe in reunion of the red and white clans practice what is known as the alchemical marriage of the red king and the white queen. Now, alchemy is tricky because there's several layers to it. Most people think that it just means combining the masculine and feminine parts of your mind or spirit or, whatever. And that's how you turn alchemical lead into gold. And there's other meanings and interpretations, but what is practiced in some of these secret groups is a literal marriage or uniting of a man from the red clan and a woman from the white clan to produce the alchemical child. And they specifically want the man to be from the reds and the woman to be from the whites. There has been red queen and white king marriages, but they consider that inferior or less favorable situation and prefer what you see here. A famous red queen, for example, was Mary Stuart. She was literally known as the Red Queen, but as we know, she messed around and found out that Elizabeth I doesn't play games. And, the same thing I said about Kennedy, if you don't follow the hierarchy's rules, unfortunately, it's back to the bardo for you. By the way, there are other groups that practice different things. There are some groups that think that everyone should just mix with everybody and essentially create a unified world race. At the same time, there are others that believe that no one should be mixing and that everyone should be sticking exactly with their particular groups. Why is there all of this disagreement, and why do people care? Why can't anyone just marry who they want? Why are the elites so careful about who they mate with and who they marry? This is because your genetic code is your energetic signature. It is believed that when God, in the Bible or in the Sumerian tablets, Enki, confused the languages, what that was really talking about was that it was confusing the energetic sound. So DNA is literally crystallized sound. It's a cymatic frequency. And you can tell by the X-ray crystallography images from Rosalind Franklin that led to Watson and Crick's discovery of the structure of the molecule. DNA totally looks like a cymatic structure. And that's because it is. And it leads to even more cymatic structures, from the fingerprints on our hands to the elaborate shell of a turtle's back, to the stripes of a tiger, or the spots on a jaguar. It's all cymatics. Beings in this realm are literally spoken into existence. That word, that divine word, is crystallized into sound and light, and then amplified through the replication process. So why are certain groups obsessed with certain energetic signatures? Well, they hypothesize that certain combinations of sounds or cymatic geometric codes embedded in the DNA can lead to a product, an avatar body, that has the ability to return to the higher astral realms and stay there rather than continuing to be cycled back and over and over again. Or at least produce a child, an alchemical child, who qualifies for certain royal titles because of who they are related to. Speaking of royal titles, what I am showing here on the bottom is the red rose of House Lancaster and the white rose of House York. The York and Lancaster houses were totally in conflict in the past. It was literally called the War of the Roses. Again, I'm going to keep saying it, this age-old battle between the reds and the whites. Now, through a certain marriage, they came together. They fused those roses and created this red-white rose. That gave rise to the Tudors. Now, in this example, I am showing on the left Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan. On the right, John Lennon and his partner Yoko Ono. And why? What exactly are they trying to do? What are they trying to produce by this red king and white queen ritual? When the red combines with the white, when the sulfur combines with the mercury, the sun combines with the moon, it produces the alchemical child. Someone who has an avatar that is most compatible, if you will, with certain sky beings. Shown here is the French-Italian model Deva Cassel. She was named Deva because she is a Deva. The Devas are the Hindu gods. It's spelled D-E-V-A, Deva or Devas. The Devas are not only the Hindu gods, but I'm going to argue shortly that they were seen all over the world. And they were worshipped by almost everyone. Until, of course, Zoroaster came around and said, no, the Devas are tricksters. This is why Dev eventually turned into Devil, and like Cruella de Vil, the devils. The Zoroastrian and eventually Christian branch associated the Devas with tricksters, evil, and things like that. Thus spoke Zarathustra. The problem is Zoroaster essentially just went from the boiling pot to the frying pan, because he said we shouldn't worship the beings above, we should be worshiping the beings below, like Ahura Mazda, right? The Asuras, or the Asharas, the beings who live below. The thing is, they're also, in a lot of ways, they are also pretty much Devas. It's just that they live in the underworld, whereas the Devas live in Asgard, Swarga. Now, back to Deva Cassel, who is shown here on the left and the middle. Now, looking at the image on the left, I just want you to take note of her eyes, her eye shape, as well as her head shape. Recall how many of these Hindu gods, the Devas, they are often depicted with elongated heads and wearing very, very tall and elaborate crowns. What the alchemical marriage is essentially trying to do is create people that have a certain look, that look sort of like a midway point between a Western European and an Eastern Asian. Because remember, as I said in the Secret Societies video, the people who rule the world aren't in either of those two geographic extremes, Western Europe or Far East Asia. They are in the middle, where the Aryani originated and then branched off from there into those extremes. But before then, they came from the Eurasian steppe plains. In fact, I went up to see exactly what Aryan means, because some people disagree on exactly what that word even means. And what I got was the Devas use that term. They basically say that Aryan literally means the humans that look like us, that look most like us. Those are the avatar bodies that we can incarnate into when we want to experience a human life, or if we are required to by their superiors, because again, they have a hierarchy too. So think of people who look like, obviously, Deva Cassell, but also, for example, Conan Gray, or Ezra Miller, or various examples. But personally, I think that Deva Cassell looks exactly like the Devas, especially in this middle picture here. And this goes back to the point I made in the very beginning when I talked about the Black Swan as it relates to Michael Jackson. Pretty much, Michael Jackson wasn't trying to make himself look Western European. Michael Jackson wanted to look Indo-Aryan, not Western European, Indo-Aryan. He wanted to look like the Hindu gods. Now, you may ask, okay, wait a minute, you said that Deva Cassell is a French-Italian model. She's French and Italian. She's not Asian. That's true, but certain bloodlines throughout all of Europe may still have some Asiatic or even Mongol DNA in them because of the Hun, Mongol, and Turkish expansions into those regions. You especially see this in people of, for example, Hungarian descent or Bulgarian. Even some Northern Europeans, like think of Finnish people, very, very high up north. They have blonde hair, but then they also, again, like I said earlier, have those very, very narrow eyes. And certain groups look for certain features, again, to produce this alchemical child. The mother basically believes that she is receiving a divine child. And this is so crucial to the secret societies that practice this. It is so important to them that there's even top secret cloning programs to basically mass produce people who look like this, who look like Deva Cassell, to be avatars to house any Deva being that is coming down to experience a human life. I call these people Vicars. Vicars. Because the so-called gods, for example, on the right here, I show a picture of sort of, I don't know if this is a doll of Lord Krishna, but basically these so-called gods are quite literally living vicariously through these humans, these avatar bodies. They are usually very tall and have fair to tan skin, but usually extremely fair. Speaking of clones, some people have asked, is Trump a clone? No, and yes. Yes and no. He's not a clone the way that I just explained in terms of he was mass-produced somewhere, no. But in terms of the history of America, there was this whole thing about the orphan trains. And in Germany, it was the Lebenswohn, right? So there was a thing of them mass-producing babies with certain features. And then they, of course, the whole weird thing about the orphan trains was, where do they come from, and why? Well, I'll tell you why. It's in order to make sure that as more and more people kept immigrating to America, they wanted to make sure that certain phenotypes would still be prominent in the population. So these mass cloned children were taken back to the surface, and all aboard these trains, right, all throughout America, and people would adopt one or two of them and raise them and take care of them, all so that more people in the American population would have these traits. So pretty much what I'm saying is Donald Trump himself is not a clone, but he is a descendant of one of these Lebensborn, these children that were specifically mass-produced to maintain a certain phenotype among Americans, as well as Germans and other populations. And they have these genetic markers that make it not so difficult to figure out who they are, because these clones were made to produce certain genes. For example, at least a quarter of the American population that is descended specifically from these mass-produced clones are immune to HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus. That was specifically engineered into the mass clones, as well as other genes, to ensure that they are tall and healthy and maintain certain features. And this actually relates to the red and white stripes of the American flag. I talked about also in my Secret Societies video how the flags of all countries around the world really tell you so much about what's going on. The red and white stripes are exactly what was also used in the old Scandinavian flag. Remember the Vikings that would sail on the ships with those vertical red and white stripes? They were basically saying that their people have achieved the red and white union. And they maintain both clans separately alongside each other. The same is depicted in the American flag, that the reds and the whites are here and they are maintained. Now the blue and the white stars mean something else, and I'll touch on that later. But pretty much, Melania and Trump, I argue, are also doing this red king, white queen ritual. Melania has this exact head shape that you see here in the left with Deva Cassell, she totally has that. People think that that's just how she's styling her hair. She puffs it up or whatever in the top of her head. No, that's her head shape, okay? That's what she looks like, and she has very narrow eyes. She has dyed her hair to make it more, blondish brown, but her hair was originally black. So she is a white queen. Trump represents the Red King, and they were matched specifically to produce Baron, as I will discuss later. But this concept of the reds and the whites and how they are related to the peoples that originated from the Eurasian steppe plains. This goes back again to when I mentioned Altai, the Altai group, who operate underneath the Eurasian steppe plains underground. So they would be among those who think that reds and whites should not mix and that should stay separate. And there's a whole history and battle going on here, which I will show in the next video, which also, of course, relates to current events. But let's take a journey to the past a little bit and see what happened.
And Liu Bang showed extraordinary skill on the battlefield. So much so that the ancient historian Sima Qian attributes his military success to supernatural causes.
When Liu Bang was still a commoner, he once killed a great snake, whereupon a spirit appeared and announced, "This snake was the son of the White Emperor, and he who killed him is the son of the Red Emperor." When he first began his uprising, he offered prayers at the altar of the soil at the city of Feng. He sacrificed to the warrior god Qi Yu and anointed his drums and flags with the blood of the sacrifice.
Whatever it was that set him apart, Liu Bang managed to capture the Qin city of Xianyang for the rebellion, and he was crowned its king as a reward.
I highly recommend watching this entire documentary. It's by Fall of Civilizations YouTube channel, and it's episode 10, The Han Dynasty. Now, again, as we saw in this clip, it's that age-old rivalry between the reds and the whites. The red snake and the white snake. The Han would represent the reds, whereas the Huns, or the Xiongnu, represent the whites. This is going to be very, very important because in my research, I discovered that it was Emperor Wu of Han who drove out the Huns, or the Xiongnu. Again, we all remember Mulan, right? The catchy song, we must defeat who? The Huns, right? So obviously Mulan and her group were the Reds. They were the Han. And they were battling against the Huns. Again, this red versus white conflict. And again, you can see this in the flag. The Chinese consider themselves the truest representation of the Han, and their flag is almost entirely red. That's not by accident. Whereas certain other Asian countries have flags that have both red and white because they consider themselves a mix of the Han and the Xiongnu. But let's go back to this Emperor Wu of Han who drove out the Xiongnu. Emperor Wu of Han. Wu Han. Spoiler alert. This is directly related to the events of 4 years ago. And in my next video about the Endgame, I'm going to discuss about what happened in underground China and exactly how that then expressed itself in Wuhan, and why we had to go through what we went through in 2020, it all has to, again, do with this red versus white conflict. But remember the name Xiongnu. That's what I'm going to talk about as well in my endgame video. And I know I switched the order a little bit. I was going to do the endgame first, but I thought that this video would be more appropriate first because, again, I need to introduce those red and white concepts so that we can better understand the dynamics of what caused what we went through 4 years ago, and unfortunately what I believe we are going to go through in the next few years. So remember the Xiongnu and Emperor Wu of Han. Speaking of emperors and kings, let's journey back to the Western world. Now, for this next video, it's going to be a bit controversial for some. Again, I'd like viewers to temporarily suspend your opinions on Trump for now. Let's decode him and his role in a purely alchemical and esoteric sense. I know some people hate him, and some people think that he's the savior. Hold on. Let's walk through this next video and try to relate it back to, again, this red and white conflict. And this is Rabbi Mendel Kessin, titled Trump is a Messianic Figure. Let's begin.
I told you the birthday of America is what? Shiva B'Tammuz. What's happening? There you are. Who is a reincarnation of Edom, Esav, right? Is Trump, which I've said many times. People don't realize Donald Trump is a reincarnation, really, not of Esav, but of Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, who's a Roman Empire, who loved Emperor, who loved Rebbe. The Gemara talks about Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, the Torah calls him. Rashi brings him down many times, that he is the perfect partner to Rebbe. The Jew, Rebbe, and the Emperor of Rome, Antoninus. And Antoninus is a Roman emperor. You know what a president of the United States really is? He's a Roman emperor. You even have the same symbol, the eagle, and so on. In any case, so Donald Trump, as far as I'm concerned, is Antoninus. Come back, and he will solve the problem. The evil, right, of the window closing.
Okay, let's pause for a second. So when he said Adam, Esau, he meant, obviously, the story of Jacob and Esau, right? So again, the red and white, Esau, Jacob. Again, Esau, or Esau, was the firstborn who was due the inheritance, but Jacob, later renamed Israel, found his own clever way to get the inheritance from Esau that was rightly Esau's. So this rabbi is relating Trump to Adam. So the Adamic race is considered the reds, right? That word means like red soil. Just like how Chem sort of means black soil. Adam means red soil, or red mud. Esau, who the descendants of Esau are known as the Edomites, So when he says Adam, Esau, he's talking about the reds, the ones that are descended from Jacob's elder brother, the firstborn, the red one, Esau. But also notice how he compared a the president of the United States to a Roman emperor, right? Again, going back to that sort of neo-Roman society that Trump belongs to. This sort of representation of America as being sort of like a new Rome.
I told you the birthday of America is what? Shivas Batamas. What's happening? There you are. Who is a reincarnation of Edom, Esav, right? Is Trump, which I've said many times. People don't realize Donald Trump is a reincarnation, really, not of Esav, but of Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, who's a Roman Empire, who loved Emperor, who loved Rebbe. The Gemara talks about Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, the Torah calls him. Rashi brings him down many times, that he is the perfect partner to Rebbe. The Jew, Rebbe, and the Emperor of Rome, Antoninus. And Antoninus is a Roman emperor. You know what a president of the United States really is? He's a Roman emperor. You even have the same symbol, the eagle, and so on. In any case, so Donald Trump, as far as I'm concerned, is Antoninus.
That's an important point to distinguish as well. So Trump isn't from the lineage of the red snake, like we learned about in the video about the Han Dynasty. He is of the lineage of the red eagle, but they're still reds. So, but let's continue.
Come back, and he will solve the problem. The evil, right, of the window closing. Now, did this happen? It's incredible. Donald Trump, and it's interesting how it started. In June 16th, Donald Trump came down the escalator, right? And he declared he's running for president, and everybody cracked up. He was the comic relief of the election. That's what Trump is, right? Everybody said, it's impossible. Not only has he no experience whatsoever, he's running against the most famous woman in the world. This is Hillary, right? Forget about it. But I'll tell you something. On June 26th, 10 days after this guy ran down to the escalator, the Supreme Court said, Anthony Kennedy, Russia, that the 14th Amendment says in the Constitution that you cannot stop a man from marrying anybody he wants. There you are. LGBTQ started 10 days, right? And they've been arguing about it for a while. So finally, after 10 days, the world resorted to the Dor Mabul. Not only, remember I told you what sealed the fate? That if you want to marry a man or a behemoth, bestiality, you got to write a ksuba. That's exactly what happened 10 days after he was running, or he declared his candidacy. You think that's an accident? And therefore, I realized about a month after he came down that, wait a minute, who is this Trump? It's a joke. But I realized, for whatever reason and so on, that this guy's Edom, he's Esav coming back. Rav Yavitzoi, he's going to be tremendous for the Klal Yisrael. And that's exactly what happened. He was tremendous, right? He's the greatest president in the United States history, right? To be behind Eretz Yisrael. I mean, think about it. You know, the Golan, Yerushalayim, where he stood up to the Arabs. It was incredible. All the things, if you recall, you know, how he stood up to the Arabs. He stood up to the UN. It was like he was in love with the Jews. And the truth is, he is. The Russian made sure that he would know who the Jews. First of all, he gave him billions of dollars, so he's going to have to now defend himself with all the lawyers because he's being indicted. He's a very, very wealthy man. He was in real estate, and we know he was in real estate in New York. It's all Jews, right? He made sure, not only that, Ivanka, right? She's Jewish. She's going to have a bar mitzvah. You heard that he once went over to Ivanka and said to him, you know, I want to become Jewish. So she said to him, what do you mean you want to become Jewish? Well, because the Jews, they're great, right? So she said to him, excuse me, you can't become Jewish. So he said, well, why not? So she said to him, who am I going to sell my chametz to? I don't know if she really did say that, but we see that he loves Jews. It's incredible. because he defied American interests in the things that he did.
I want to point that out there. That comment that he just made, he defied American interests for Israel. Just something to note, but let's continue.
Therefore, Trump is really Esav doing tshuva. In fact, it's always interesting to look at him. He's always red. He wears red ties. I mean, it's like he's got a complexion of red and so on, you know.
Okay, so when he says tshuva, he means repentance. Again, this goes back to that concept that I brought up when I first introduced the reds and the whites. So the reds, you know, according to the whites, did something that caused them to lose their firstborn title. In the Cain and Abel story, it was because Cain killed his brother Abel, right? And then he had to leave. In the Noah's son story, it's because Ham saw his father when he was indecent, and then he was cursed. In the Esau and Jacob story, Jacob tricked Esau out of his inheritance, and Jacob justifies it as, well, if you fell for that, then you don't deserve the inheritance anyway, kind of thing. So the whole thing of the reds having to do tshuva, having to do repentance, is the idea that the reds should be subservient to the whites, right? The curse of Ham. Ham and his descendants, the Canaanites, the sons and daughters of Cain, Cain being the son of Adam, Adam being the first son of God. There are, of course, like we said, the Nazi groups who are saying, no, we will not. We are the firstborn sons of Adam. We are the Canaanites. And in their minds, they want to restore their position as the firstborn and the rightful heirs to the dynasty. But there are some groups, unfortunately, who belong to the White Clan, who don't even think that the Reds should even count among the Aryani. So Hitler was essentially trying to argue that no, yes, we should. So pretty much that whole campaign, that whole thing that went on, was Hitler trying to convince the world, but trying to convince certain secret societies and underground groups that the German people specifically should count among the Aryani. But till this day, some of the White Clan do not acknowledge certain Reds as Aryans. Again, unless they participate in this Shuva thing. So, let's continue.
So God says to the angels, when he's holding court, in that sense, says, okay, Trump started the process in its 4 years. It was fabulous. The economy was great. Everything was doing fabulous. And his relationship with Israel was incredible. But I got to stop it, because the screaming, there's no justice here. And I am God. I have to follow justice. So God says, okay, I'm getting rid of Trump for a while. So the angels look at God and they say, excuse me, you can't do that. It's impossible. He's the greatest president of all. Everybody's got a job. They're making money hand over fist. Our stock market's going wild. The economy's incredible. How are you going to get rid of the guy? So God looks at the angels and says, I don't have any problem. I'm God. Watch what I do. So what did God do? He destroyed the achievements of Trump. Number one. How did he do that? COVID. That's why COVID came. COVID destroyed Trump. If it wasn't for COVID, Trump would have Zika won the second time. But COVID destroyed all his achievements. The economy went south, as they say. All right, everything changed. Everybody had to stay home. Right, people were dying left and right. And not only that, COVID not only destroyed Trump's achievements, right? But what it also did is it allowed Biden to hide in his basement and campaign from his basement so nobody saw what an idiot the guy was. Anyway, but Biden serves a purpose. What is the purpose? To stop Trump, to satisfy justice, that America is now suffering from COVID, right? Nobody has a job. The inflation is killing everybody. The gas prices, guess what? That's real suffering. You are looking at Esav fighting Esav. There's the Rosh Esav, which is the Democratic Party, right? It's a Democratic Party. It's the liberals, the progressives, the left, that are trying to destroy, right, normalization and society. And then you're looking at the Toiv Sheba Esav, Esav who is doing tshuva in that sense, right? But why? They hate each other. You're looking at a war of Esav against Esav. But who's on the side of the evil of Esav? The Satan. We don't realize the Satan is dying. Right. You don't realize that.
When he says Satan, he means Satan.
98% of his strength is gone. He had to give it back to the Jews without getting into the whole Kabbalistic understanding of how it derives strength. 98% of the Satan is gone in terms of his strength. He's dying. If he realizes if Trump gets in, it's over with. Then he will contribute to the tikkun of the Jewish people, and his reign is gone. So the Satan, in his power as a Yetzirah, where he can convince you, has convinced half America, right, that Trump is crazy. Trump is evil. Trump is going to destroy democracy. Right? So we realize there's a war going on between the good part of Esav and the bad part of Esav. And the Satan is desperately trying to get everybody to vote for Biden. Because Biden is his man. Right? He's destroying America. Right? He's getting everybody to believe in the LGBTQ. Right? Transgender. All this evil nonsense. Robbery. Crime is up like crazy. Right? Everybody, they're anti-police. They want to defund the police. It's insane. You see? And this is all Biden. But I'll tell you something just as an aside. Why? Because the Jews have a unique feature. Oiz and Teferes. The Jews have a unique feature called Oiz, might, and beauty. And it says that when the Jews sin, where does the Oiz and Teferes go? It goes to the Goyim. It's an act of God. Moshe wants to make sure that he will be the president of the United States, because he must destroy the Democratic Party. Look, before the Geula, everybody gets paid back what they did. And this is their payback. The Moshe says, you destroyed Esav, you destroyed the world, you made it immoral. It's incredible what America has become. I must destroy you. Before the Mashiach comes, that's justice. You see? But who's going to take out the Democratic Party? Trump. You think that the Erev Rav is only in Israel? Who's the head of the DOJ? Merrick Garland, Jew. Who's the Secretary of State? Tony Blinken, a Jew. Who's the head of the NSA? Sullivan, a Jew. Who's the head of the Senate leader? Chuck Schumer, a Jew. Excuse me, what is this? It's like a Jewish cabal. It's all Erev Rav. What's the amazing thing? That the Erev Rav is all over the place.
So Erev Rav is talking about, he's referring to, like you said, the bad side of Esav. So Erev Rav is the mixed multitude. Pretty much when Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt, along came with them the Erev Rav, these sort of other people that became Jewish, and they are associated with the Reds. What he is saying is that it's the bad side of those people that are according to him, the Jews running the DOJ and all of that. So just keep that in mind.
Because they're dying. America is falling. We see that. I mean, the morality of America is in the pits. It's sounding. The cities are dying. The morality is dying. You know, even in the army, they're more interested in woke than they are in the ability to fight. Can you imagine an army, you know, that is only interested in, well, are you woke or not? You see? It's incredible. And we see that even America is turning against this woke philosophy. I mean, Anheuser-Busch with, what do you call the name of their beer? Miller, what? Bud Light, right? You know, last time I heard, they lost $18 billion. You have any idea what kind of loss of sale that is? It's incredible. Why they are taking on positions of politics. It's stupid, you see. But that's how much the Sultan wants to destroy Trump. But that's really what it is. It is a satanic war backed by the Arab Rav to destroy Trump. Why? Because Trump is a messianic figure. And that is why I believe that Shiva Asar B'Tammuz is the birthday, that America is the last battle, you see, in order to help Klal Yisrael, right? Klal Yisrael do the tikkun. They are the last place. And therefore, America has to be born, which is where it's going to take place at the time of the greatest disaster when the Jews allowed the Zoyamah to re-enter creation. Nothing is an accident. It's a war against God, disguised as some type of, philosophical debate. That's what it is. And this is all what's happening, you see. So look, let's hope that Oid, very shortly, the Baruch Hashem is going to say, enough is enough. My children have suffered enough. I need to stop this. And we have no idea what the Gul is. I'm going to tell you something. The Gul is not where all of a sudden God throws out these guys. That's the first stage of the Gula, where Biden, Harris, DOJ, all of this collapses. The Democratic Party, the liberals, the progressives, the Muslim is going to take them all out. So we think, wow, what a redemption. No, the redemption is we will be returned to being like Adam Rishon before the sin. We cannot even begin to imagine what Adam Rishon before the sin was.
He's referring to like Adam Kadmon in, I believe it was it Gnostic or I think it was Thelemite that had that concept of Adam Kadmon, but the original man, not in his fallen state, but when he still had abilities, let's say.
And the Medrash says that the Malachim, he was so impressive, so great stature, that the angels started singing Shira to Adam Rishon. Could you imagine? What do you mean, an angel? Do you have any idea what an angel is? They're off the charts. And they think Adam is God? So they're singing Shira to Adam? Yeah, that's how great he was. We will return to that situation. Could you imagine what we're going to look like, right? What's going to happen in that era?
So he seems to also believe in this 5D ascension thing.
Remember one thing, it says, and the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God, which is a very interesting concept. God will dominate the earth the way the sunlight dominates the earth in daytime.
So it's also talking about how the sun is considered God, both of them, both the sun that we see to some factions and the hidden sun or the black sun, Amun-Ra, to other factions. The sun is God, and there was even a book, I haven't read it yet, but it's in my list, called Yahweh and the Sun, talking about how Jews, before they became more moon-oriented, like following the lunar calendar and things like that, they were worshiping the sun, like many cultures back in the day. So the concept of God will dominate the sky the way the sun does is kind of relating that they're actually kind of both the same.
We have no idea what that is. And if you think Egypt, right, Mitzrayim, they had incredible miracles. Could you imagine? The whole Nile River turns to blood. What will happen in the end will make Egypt pale in comparison. Right? That's the miracles. So the beginning of all of this is to remove the evil. And we are looking at that now between the evil of Esav and the good part of Esav fighting to the death. Just like we watched in Eretz Yisrael. The Erev Rav and the people who are ambassadors to God, right? They are fighting for stability and for existence. That's what's happening. So let us hope that this is, right, the last term of evil, and that we will see the Mashiach, hopefully, before Rosh Hashanah. Thank you.
All right. So Rabbi Kessin believes that Trump is the reincarnation of Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. Now, I've heard rabbis say different things. I've heard many people say different things. But I also consider it very interesting that as a Jewish person, he believes in reincarnation. Let's talk about that for a second. So, reincarnation used to be a very prominent belief among Jewish people, the common Jewish people. But now it seems that only people in certain circles of Judaism still hold that belief. But then every once in a while you would hear things like, someone say, like in a family, someone would just half-heartedly say, so-and-so's new baby is totally the reincarnation of Uncle so-and-so who died 10 years ago. He's come back. And it's just this common and normal thing among Jewish families, but it's one of those things where, to the masses, it's not something that's spoken about a lot, because again, it's like, wait a minute, reincarnation, isn't that supposed to be more of a Buddhist belief, not so much of the Abrahamic faiths? Reincarnation was a known fact to the Jews, especially way back in the ancient days. The custom and the practice of it is still acknowledged, but sort of in a, more hush-hush way, more of just within the family kind of thing. But I've also heard a rabbi that swore that Trump is the reincarnation of King Cyrus, who, as we know, was famous in the Bible for returning the Jews, allowing the Jews to return to Israel after the Babylonian exile so they can rebuild their temple. So they relate Trump's U.S.-Israeli relations to that kind of character, to the point where some of them even think that Trump himself is the reincarnation of King Cyrus. I've also heard some other people say that he may be Caligula, shown here in the bottom pictures. But I'm not so sure of that. When I try to use my intuition and feel out, okay, was Trump Caligula? I'm not getting a connection there. But who I do feel a connection with Trump is Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. Now, there were quite a number of Marcus Aurelius Antoninuses, right, of ancient Rome, but there was one specifically, a Syrian Roman Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, who was an ardent sun worshipper, so much so that he called himself the priest of Elah al-Jabal, the god of the mountain. This El was specifically referring to the Aten, sun disk, and he was so fervent about his worship of this El, of this sun disk god, that he gave it his all. And this again relates to what I said about Trump being part of the equestrians, who would be the zodiac year of the horse, but also the Levites in the tribe of Israel. The Levites are considered the priests. And in this potential past life of Trump, he considered himself a sun priest, a priest of the sun, at least the sun disk. Now, from what I understand, in this past life, he was worshiping El. In another life, he was worshiping Yah. So he worshipped the sun disk the sun that we see as Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, and then later on he was worshipping the sun behind the sun, or the hidden sun, or the black sun, Amun-Ra, like some of the Nazi groups do, the ones that have the black sun symbol. Now, what I found was essentially that Trump no longer worships either side. And I'll talk about that later. But right now, what he's doing is, again, playing the role, the reenactment of what Amun-Ra did to a bunch of the spirit guides by throwing them all down here, the human ones, and replacing the spirit guides essentially with AI bots to convince people to reincarnate instead. He thought that was more efficient, and he basically fired the human spirit guides. And that's what Trump was basically reenacting in his hit TV show, The Apprentice. And it's sometimes confusing when you study this stuff because there was a lot of religious syncretism going on where the ancient Greeks and Romans would combine the sun gods and think of them as one, whereas Egypt was very distinct. They had Ra and they had Amun-Ra. And then Akhenaten came in later and said, well, he's Aten now. The sun disk is Aten, and that's the only one that we should be worshipping. So whereas Egypt made a very clear distinction between the various suns, the Greco-Romans tended to just combine them all and call them Helios. So this El al-Jabal was also known as Helios. Just as Donald Trump switched from Democrat to Republican, he switched from the L's, so to speak, to the Amun-Ra, or the hidden sun. But that's just in seeming. I will argue later about why I believe that he's still an independent, which is what he used to be before he started playing this game of polarization. But even then, there's a reason behind it, and we'll get into that. So back to specifically Trump and Melania being another representation of the Red King, White Queen ritual. Now, Melania Trump is Slovenian, and first off, she's very, very tall, and the hierarchy specifically wanted Baron to be tall. So that's one of the reasons why she was matched with Donald Trump. But if you look closely at her features, this is what I was talking about before, about how now she has obviously dyed her hair, but before it was black, and her name is Melania. And also notice her eyes and her cheekbones. Again, very reminiscent of the image I showed earlier. But as a Slovenian, she is a Slav. So remember, again, going back to the hierarchy. So she is part of the White clan, but she is a Slav. Whereas Trump is part of the Red clan, but he's an equestrian. So basically they were matched because they complemented and balanced each other in terms of their clan lineage as well as their ranking in the hierarchy. Now, where did the Red and the White clans come from? So with the Reds, it's a little more complicated because, again, some of them, like Trump, are associated with the Red Eagle. And the Red Eagle, from my research, comes from Aldebaran. But in terms of the White clan, they come from the constellation Draco. Now, I call both branches of these groups Draconians. Now, I make a distinction between Draconian and Reptilian. A Draconian, at least in my definitions, is not a reptilian. And As a biologist, I'm looking at species classification and taxonomy. And from what I see from the Draconians, they are clearly not reptiles, right? There are certain factions that are working for the Archons that are obviously reptile. Specifically, the leading clan among the quote-unquote whites came from that center point that you see in the screen there, the Cat's Eye Nebula. Now, I spoke before about how I would explain how they all got trapped here. They got trapped here because when they arrived, the Arcturians tilted the Earth 23.5 degrees so that the North Pole is no longer pointing back home to the Cat's Eye Nebula, the target in the center there. It has now and ever since been pointing towards this other circle, and right now it's pointing at Polaris, the current pole star. This changed everything. It not only changed our weather and the climate, it changed the frequency, because now the Earth was no longer spinning and pointing, its axis wasn't pointing back home for the Draconians, but now the Earth is turning in this gigantic circle that we call the precession of the equinoxes, which causes the great year cycle, the astrological ages. The problem is, it also caused a massive decrease in the frequency level and their ability to return home. And they've been stuck here ever since. And Draconians, who desperately want the world axis to be realigned to their homeworld so they can return. The second reason why I call them Draconians is because of what I saw them as while out of body. Now, so again, you guys know me, I went back to etymology. Now, the Greek word drakon literally means basically a giant sea monster. Think of Jonah and the whale. It was not a whale. The Bible actually says that Jonah was swallowed by a fish, a giant fish. But a drakon doesn't have to be a fish. It's just any giant sea creature is considered a drakon. D-R-A-K-O-N. Now, when Latin came along and called it draconem, they associated this term with serpents and snakes. And we've been using that derivation, that understanding ever since. But a drakon is not necessarily a snake. It's any giant sea monster. And when I saw exactly what these beings are, their true form, not so much the form with the long red or white hair, but their truest form, this is what I saw. Yep, giant squid. Red and white squid. Colossal squid, actually. But again, they're not reptiles. Squids are cephalopods. And you know, this reminds me of the concept of we joke about the flying spaghetti monster, but also think of the Cthulhu mythos and the Kraken. The Draconians don't show this form often, but every once in a while there is a UFO abductee or an NDE or some report claiming to see a tentacled being. Now, I'm not a marine biologist specifically, but what I can tell you is that cephalopods like octopus and squid have the most alien DNA on Earth. And when we relate this back again to the Devas with the elongated heads. There's also depictions of Hindu gods with many arms, sometimes as many as 10 arms, all extending out around them. And I was always curious exactly what that was. Those many arms were tentacles, and their elongated heads were their squid heads. Now, the form that the squid beings, or what I call the Draconians, because again, they came from the Draco constellation, the forms that they take, I have classified into 3 modes or variations. The first is what you see here as a regular colossal squid. The second is a more anthropomorphic form, the one that closer resembles the Hindu gods with the many arms and the very, very tall crowns. And then lastly, the third mode or form would be a humanoid or hybrid looking form, which is more like what I showed before with the red-haired ones and the white-haired ones. Now, they don't look like, for example, the Pirates of the Caribbean character. I believe it was Davy Jones. They don't look like that, with the tentacles all around his mouth and things like that. It's more of that their tentacles are behind their head and sort of look more like hair in terms of like extensions. And they also have these 2 longer tentacles that hang from the side of their head. And I'll show the significance of that in a bit. But I want to go back to their elongated skulls and elongated heads. Now, the squid beings protect their heads with those elaborate Hindu crowns. It's not just for show. There's a reason for that. I read an article and saw a video about how seafarers and fishermen in, I believe it was Japan, how they, when they cast their net out onto the sea to collect fish and other sea creatures for their fishing company, the way they deal with squid is by literally karate chopping like a quick blow to the head of the squid, and that completely stuns them. Because squid have a very sensitive and giant nerve or neuron wrapping around their head longitudinally. And if that nerve experiences a trauma, the squid goes limp. So the squid people, the Draconians, they wear these elaborate crowns, not just for show, but also for protection. So in the Indian subcontinent, the crowns of the kings and queens, the Rajas and the Ranis, are not only a fashion statement, but they are also to symbolize their authority and divine right to rule over the common people. And they rejoice if a deva is born among them. Now, the interesting thing, though, is that squids are cannibals. They eat each other. And, I talked about the true meaning of the Lord's Supper as a ritual, essentially, of cannibalism. And in Hinduism as well, you have this concept of the Rakshasa demons of Indian lore, and how essentially they are a lineage of flesh eaters. And remember, in the Matrix film, the robots known as, I can't remember, but I think they were called the Scouters or something like that. But they were these robotic tentacled things. So again, this concept of a tentacled octopus-like, squid-like entity that is, managing the Matrix pods. Here is a photograph of a beached red squid on the left. And on the right is a photo by National Geographic of a vampire squid. Now, the vampire squids are also of the reds, and they specifically have this unique feature where their tentacles are webbed. They have webs in between each tentacle, and it can sort of puff out like an umbrella, a cute little umbrella, and be this sort of dome shape. But keep this in mind, this sort of white webbed bottom and this sort of cone-headed red top, right? Because that looks eerily similar to the Islamic Sufi dancers who wear these elongated red caps, and they spin around in such a way that their dress fans out and expands out around them. And they do this esoteric hand symbol, which is clearly as above, so below. And they describe it as that they're bringing in energies from above and distributing it down to the earth below. So in the Islamic mysticism circles, they totally know about the squid beings. Another group that I think encountered the red squid specifically are the Himba tribal women of Angola, Africa. Now, they style their hair in such a way that they put this red paste on their hair to put it in this, essentially this tentacle form. So, and it's of course all red. So it seems highly likely that they also encountered the red squid beings sometime in their distant past. Moving up north to Egypt, we of course have depictions in the hieroglyphs of the pharaohs wearing very, very tall white crowns. Now, of course, in Egypt, we have the concept of the red crown and the white crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, right? And I believe it was Pharaoh Narmer who eventually combined Upper and Lower Egypt by combining the red and white crowns. Again, the alchemical marriage of the red king and the white queen. Now, even Osiris, who is wearing in the picture on the left the white crown, you know, a lot of people think that those are feathers on the side of his head, and of course that's how the Egyptians depicted it. But from a biologist standpoint, that looks very similar to me to the flaps or the fins that are on the side of the squid's very elongated head. Some of them depict it, some of them don't, like in the picture on the left here, where it's just the very, very tall and obviously squid-like depiction. Coming back to Rome, with the Holy Roman Empire and the Catholic Church, they also wear hats that commemorate the squid beings. Now, it's interesting because I found an article that Pope Francis apparently wants to ditch the mitre. And this is interesting because, again, Pope Francis is a bit different than the traditional popes of the past, being a Jesuit, of course, and also being rather liberal in his policies. Now, I find this statement of his rather interesting, given what we now know. Could it be that he no longer wants to worship the squid because of different elite faction wars? Something to think about. Now, the way that the Pope's hat is shaped now isn't the same that it was in the past. In the past, it looked like what I show on the photo on the right, which looks very much more similar to the Hindu crowns and what I saw the draconians wear in the upper astral. They wear crowns that look more similar to that, the Pope on the right, than what they're wearing now. But it's still obviously a squid head because of the shape. That Pope hat, especially the older ones, look exactly like the Ottoman hats. This is a photo of Sultan Suleiman, the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire. And when he was crowned the Magnificent, he received this, basically the crown of the Devas. And it's interesting, again, how even in Sunni Islam, they are also still worshipping the squid heads. And this particular scene here is from a show called Magnificent Century. I've watched a couple of the first episodes. Very interesting, and it's rather esoteric in my opinion. And of course, Hinduism, they love their gods, the Devas. And again, a crown like this looks similar to the shape of the Pope's mitre. Another interesting thing to note are the grand statues of Easter Island. I was always curious about these because they look kind of odd and weird. Why are the shapes of the head so, a bit distorted? So take a moment with me to turn back the sands of time. Imagine the green, grassy hill turning back to volcanic soil. Imagine everything rolling back up. The statues return to their original position where they were standing tall and proud as the original sculptors made them. I wanted to know what the original sculptors were thinking. What inspired these magnificently odd statues? What did they see? What do they know? I went out of body to the Easter Island region to see for myself, but the Easter Island of the past. What I saw were giant beings in mode 2 of the squid, which is the more anthropomorphic form. And they were on a level in the upper atmosphere or the astral where their bodies looked, kind of solid, but not really. But their crowns, again, those elaborate crowns that the Pope and the Muslim Sultan and the Hindu Rajas wear, they had that on, but it was translucent. And the jewels were so sparkly and bright. But the point was, it was translucent. The crown was almost see-through. And I think what the sculptors were trying to portray or convey was that their body was solid, which is carved out of rock, but then they left their crown, which, if you think about it, the outline shape, you could fit a crown there. It's almost as if they're missing their crown. And that was what the sculptors wanted to do. They didn't want to make the crown also out of stone, because it wasn't. It was translucent and sparkly. What is also interesting to note about these statues is their floppy ears. That was also kind of interesting to me. Like, why do they have these sort of floppy looking ears on the sides of their heads? It turns out those aren't floppy ears. Those were the tentacles that the squid have, the two extended ones that rest on the sides of their face. Now, what other culture styles their hair that way? So the Orthodox Jews have a very characteristic look. They wear these very tall top hats, and they style their hair in such a way that they grow the sides very long and twist them. Sometimes they're so long they go all the way down to their waist. This is not by accident. So again, we have the Christians, the Catholics, the Muslims, the Hindus, the Egyptians, and now the Jews as well. Is everyone just worshiping the giant squid? What on earth is going on? Now, there are some other Jews that wear hats like this. Okay, looks very stylish. But where did that come from? Let's head back over to Easter Island. My, oh my. Need I say more? Well, there is more. Of course, there's always more. I figured out that basically the ritual act of circumcision is a private and secret dedication, basically, to these gods with the elongated heads that go up like this. Basically, their heads look like the underside of a circumcised male organ. So certain cultures and religious groups are obligated, according to the tenets of their religion, to circumcise and dedicate themselves to these gods, to pretty much identify with these gods. And, you know, I kind of have my own little joke that these so-called gods are basically dickheads because of not only how they look, but how they have treated humanity. Heading on over to yet another part of the world, the Paracas skulls of Peru. I want to really emphasize that this is not cranial deformation. This is absolutely not cranial deformation. You cannot create this much brain volume or tissue volume from simply banding the skull of a child. You can distort the shape, but you can't add volume. That's not there. So the people with skulls like this are clearly hybrids, whereas the commoners would practice the cranial deformation and the banding to make themselves look a little more like the elite class, who are obviously more related to the squid. The commoners would have heads that were a little pointier on the top, but nowhere near the length and the height of skulls of true hybrids. Now, this alien faction are the Arcturians, and Akhenaten, at least from my observation of the hieroglyphs, was clearly a part of that faction. Akhenaten and Nefertiti wore blue crowns that extended back, in contrast to the white and red crowns of Egypt before then that were extending straight up. And then Akhenaten basically just said, all right, it's not going to be the reds or the whites. The blues are coming back and they're taking over now. So Akhenaten got rid of all of the Egyptian pantheon and said, no, only worship the Aten. The sun disk is within the earth construct. It's not outside of the firmament. That sun disk is pasted there. Outside of the firmament is Amun-Ra. This is an interesting article I found. I'll let you read that. You can pause it. Yeah, that's just something to note. All right, back to the Trumps. So, Donald Trump and Melania Nas, were matched together to bring in Baron. Now, Baron, I know I checked Baron's height earlier this fall, and he was 6'7". I checked his height again for this presentation, and he's apparently now 6'9". My goodness, he's a giant. He's still a child. He's still a boy. And if you argue, well, he's 18. 18 is still a teen. He's a teenager. He's a child. And he's a male. So he's nowhere near done growing at 18. He still has plenty of years of growth left. So he's going to keep getting taller and taller, which of course was the plan. Now, Baron's role in this is the Return of the King ritual. So a lot of people are wondering, is Donald Trump a time traveler? Is he a time traveler? The Trumps were keeping Tesla's files. Is Trump a time traveler? Donald Trump is not a time traveler. Okay, he's like, 78? He's not a time traveler. But what I argue in this presentation is that Baron is going to be the time traveler. He's currently being groomed for this process. And that's really who Ingersoll Lockwood was referring to in his books. There was a certain actor in 2019 that was killed for mentioning the Return of the King ritual. Who was this actor? I'll give you a hint. He was associated with the one who wields the thunderous weapon. Okay? Now, this actor mentioned the Return of the King in relation to Trump in 2019. And he was killed for it because the hierarchy doesn't like you talking about that kind of stuff. Well, I'm going to talk about it. Okay, so the Return of the King ritual is basically that someone, a male, of the royal families and certain lineages, they go back in time. In my Time Gates video, I talked about how there are only 72 slots for time travelers to go back in time per year. Every year, they leave at least one, sometimes two of those spots open. In my Time Gates video, I talked about the significance of the number 72, but how sometimes it comes as 71 or 70, like what I showed in the video for I think it was the elders of Israel. But the reason for that is because they have to reserve a spot for the Return of the King. Now, who were these men that participated in the Return of the King ritual? I have my list here. These include, but are not limited to, King Sargon of Akkad, Nimrod, the father of Freemasonry, various pharaohs, King Solomon, Ashurbanipal, Nebuchadnezzar, various Indian Rajas and Persian kings, Alexander of Macedon, Emperor Nero, Charlemagne, Napoleon Bonaparte II, not the Napoleon that we know, his son, Tsar Nikolai Romanov. Yes, Tsar Nikolai Romanov. Adolf Hitler. And currently, Baron Trump, who is training for this next role. Now, the Egyptian god Osiris was the first of this Return of the King ritual. That is why one of his other names is the chief among the Westerners. I told you guys about the significance or the hidden meaning between, or the hidden meaning behind the West and the East. When a Freemason asks you, are you a traveling man? The West means you're going to the past. The East means you came from the future. So, and what's the purpose of this Return of the King ritual? Basically, fundamentally, it's for immortality. Okay, we're almost done. Maybe. So, I want to talk about current events really quick, because this relates. So, it's Friday the 13th, and I open up my YouTube homepage, and there's all this top stories about drones, right? So, here's my perspective. People are freaking out, what's going on? Who are they? What are these drones? First of all, they're not drones. Okay, they're clearly, they look like commercial jets. And it's not a UFO because obviously it's following the aviation regulations of the, types of flashing lights that they're supposed to have. But who are they? Need to know and you don't. Need to know, and it has been determined that you don't. What do I mean by that? Okay, so shown before you is the pyramid, okay? So obviously the people on the bottom don't know, but the people who are telling you we don't know, the authorities that are supposed to know and that we're supposed to go to for answers, they don't know. Why don't they know? Because they are only in about the middle of this pyramid. Think of the middle block there. That's where, our authorities are. They don't get to know either. So they don't know. So they're being truthful. They don't know. Who are they? They are them, the hybrids, the sons and daughters of God, the Bene Elohim, the elder race, those who live below, who are direct descendants of those who live above, those who don't have to go through the kind of things you go through and are not subject to the kind of laws and regulations that you have to follow. They don't have to follow the formal aviation regulations of, giving you their flight plans and identifying their craft and things like that. And they don't care at all that it's inconveniencing or frightening you, because most people are on the bottom of that pyramid and they don't get to know. Okay? So why are they coming up on the surface, and why now? If they usually live underground, where there's more advanced technology, what on earth are they doing in our neck of the woods? Well, I have a hunch why. There's a few more things I need to confirm, but basically, the underground has far more advanced technology than the surface world. And the people who live there, like I said before, are much taller. They have much larger heads and are clearly hybrids. And I'm talking about very deep underground, obviously not the level of your basement or the subway. I'm talking about very, very deep underground, like even beneath the deep underground military bases. They have more advanced forms of transportation. And they've had it for centuries, actually millennia. Whereas the humans on the surface were running around, right? In the Stone Age, the people underground were living lives that are very similar to how we live today. Now, I suspect that this has something to do with the Hyperloop. Now, Elon Musk unbeknownst to most, is actually a contractor for the underground cities and civilizations. He builds massive things for them, anything that they want, of course. Now, Elon, of course, that Hyperloop wasn't going to be for us, That wasn't going to be for the surface dwellers. It was going to be for the special people who live underground. But every once in a while, and now every once in a very long while, there's a malfunction. Now, it's not like the surface world where things break down, every other, month or whatever, and there has to be construction all the time. In the underworld, in the inner earth, their technology is far more advanced and can last without all of this planned obsolescence and breakdown. I don't think that the malfunction that occurred to damage one of the major Hyperloop, I don't think it was by accident. There has been underground elite faction wars and conflicts that every once in a while would also cause beings from the underground to emerge back on the surface. And, oh my goodness, right? When you see them, it's like, oh, you're tall. But the point is, congratulations. You are witnessing something that doesn't happen very often, not in most people's lifetimes. This is what the theosophist Annie Besant called the externalization of the hierarchy. Now, this is nowhere near the first time that something like this has happened. In ancient Egypt, we have hieroglyphs of helicopters and planes and other craft that are clearly not of that time. In Mesoamerica, we also have depictions from the Mayans and the Aztecs and the Incas of craft, flying craft, that a divine being would be flying around in. Now, the hint is the fact that these so-called drones, which are not drones, are only flying at night. Remember, the squid beings are like vampires. Not the Hollywood version of vampires, but some of that ancient vampire lore does have some truth, particularly that they don't care for sunlight. For the vampire squid species, they want no sun, no day, no light. They curse the sun, which is in contrast to the wolves, right? The wolf clan that howls at the moon and is opposed to the moon and prefers the day. And another thing too is, these people, these beings, these hybrids, they have lives that are even more bustling than ours. If they want to go to a mall in underground Ibiza, they're going. So nothing's going to stop them, even a malfunctioning Hyperloop. So they're like, all right, well then we're going to take the surface route. You may think, well, why won't they just drive in cars? Obviously a plane is faster. So they're going to take jets, but they're going to be in low light, unidentified, and no, you don't get to know their flight plan and their identity and who they are. So they're taking the surface route, which is very rare for them to do, but every once in a while when they have to do it, they're going to do it, to go to wherever place that they wanted to go to. Humans live on Midgard, where the theta wave blanket, or the Schumann resonance, is draped over us, keeping us in a very, very extremely low vibrational state. This Schumann resonance is basically only here on this level. If you go high up into the upper dimensions, or when you go very deep underground, that Schumann resonance is lifted off of you. And this is why so many human elite factions fight to the death for a ticket to the underground. I've spoken before about how if Kamala won, basically no one's getting underground. But if Trump won, at least some folks would make it underground. And that's where the Trump State Fair comes in, which I will talk about shortly. But first, I want to basically summarize Trump's role here. So, is Trump the savior? No, he is not a savior. He is a sign, the trumpet of revelations. There is an old European legend that when the clown comes to the throne, the empire will fall. When the clown comes to the throne, the empire will fall. Now, Trump is the trump card, the jester, the fool, the joker. Why do I say that? Well, think about it. Congrats to those who voted for Trump. Awesome. Great. We get Trump for another 4 years. But, guess who is going to be in office when the 2030 agenda rolls out? A Democrat, a liberal, a progressive, someone who's going to be obviously more progressive about those changes rather than being more conservative with their judgment and erring more on the side of caution. So my point is, the timing was all planned. And every 4 years, I see people falling for this. And that's the joke. That's the point of the jest. The court jester. Trump works for the highest bidder. And he has changed his party affiliation from Republican to Independent, Democrat, back to Republican, Independent again, and most recently back to Republican. So, but my intuition tells me that deep down in his heart of hearts, and again, I can't prove what's in Trump's heart, but what I feel is that he is an independent at his core. He is not alt-right like the neo-Nazis think. He is not on the side of the Black Sun or Amun-Ra, but he's also not on the side of the Democratic far left. Basically, he's not worshiping either sun. So honestly, I should do a second video, possibly titled Trump and the Moon, because I would really like to break down and decode his tweets. A lot of people think they're bizarre, but there is a hidden meaning behind them when you know esoteric code. So he is not associated with the sun disk or the hidden sun. And it goes deeper than him having a painting of the sun god Apollo and other Greco-Roman statues in his tower. Trump dances between the two suns. He tangos with rival elite factions. He flirts with secret societies and clinks glasses with the hybrids. He's got connections. And ultimately, that's what the wealthy groups that finance him really want. Connections and access to the underground. Remember, the rabbi said that Trump is doing tshuva. Although he changed his political affiliation several times, they were at strategic times. For example, a month before the September 11th attacks, he changed his affiliation to Democrat. Why? Why? The point that I really want people to focus on is don't participate in the grand political theater. Be non-affiliated. Transcend the polarity, the duality. 4 years is such a short time frame. You can't see the grand design. I already talked about the red and white stripes. The blue and white stars talk about Atlantis and Quetzalcoatl. But again, keep in mind that America is called the land of the feathered serpent. And those who carry the yellow flag with the snake that says "Don't tread on me." How ironic. How ironic. There's a giant snake underground that says the same thing about you. Now, we Americans get to stay here in this land because of certain, let's say, deals that were made. But unfortunately, Quetzal demands offerings. He always has. And he feels that you haven't been offering enough. And he's getting angry and causing sinkholes. Unfortunately, there will always be groups, factions, willing to offer beings like Quetzal the offering he requires. Trump changed his party affiliation right before the September 11th attacks because he didn't want to be associated with that. Now, I'm not saying that one side is good and one side is bad. Each side is playing their role. They wanted a Republican in office during the September 11th attacks, and they want a Democrat in office during Agenda 2030. Don't fall for the game. Neither side has your best interest in mind. The entire campaign season is basically one big social experiment. Can we convince the people, the masses, to vote for the candidate that we already picked beforehand? Presidents are selected, not elected. If the people don't vote for who they've already pre-selected, well, that's where the Electoral College comes in, right? To put him in there anyway, the one that they want, not the one that you want, the one that they need in office at that time for a specific purpose. People say money makes the world go round. No. Human sacrifice makes the world go round. There, I said it. This is why I fight. This is why I will not stop. This is why I made Crimes of the Gods. So let's stop looking at the eye of providence. I think we've stared at it for long enough. And let's go into the Trump State Fair. Okay, so my Iowa report. And to answer the question, why Iowa? Again, because of all these sinkholes that have been going around, Quetzalcoatl is more based in the south, the southern United States into Mexico. So it won't be safe, basically, for too many people to be underground with that kind of instability in the bedrock. So Iowa is a better option in terms of geographical location away from Quetzal. And basically, the Iowa State Fairgrounds are going to serve as a stress test during the state fair. Can the underground base handle the weight of millions of people walking around and standing around, and can security be maintained with that many people around as well. The governor of Iowa stated in an article that I will post in the description about the state fair that her state is ready to host this grand state fair. But what I saw when I went out of body is that there's still a lot that they're putting together. It's just typical bunk beds. It's not very luxurious, like the Big Apple basement. That's nice. The Iowa Underground is rather basic. Now, that could just be me having too high standards, but basically, it's going to be a situation where only certain people, a select few, are going to receive what I saw as these military-grade satellite phones. I literally saw personnel, they look like secretaries, labeling and programming these phones and keeping a list. This person or this family is going to have this satellite phone with this serial number. They're basically registering it. And pretty soon in the mail, they're also going to receive their nice new bulky satellite phone. So basically the Iowa State Fair is going to be a stress test in the next year and a half, 2025 all the way into 2026, in preparation for the events that I'm going to discuss in the end game that are coming later and then into 2030. So keep an eye out for Iowa. Okay, that was a really long one. Now I want to leave on a more positive note, because despite humanity being ruled over by various alien and elite factions and vampire squid, I don't want people to feel hopeless. I truly believe that we will make it out of this situation, that we will make it through this. All right, so some announcements. I am not on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Discord, Rumble, Odyssey, Telegram, BitChute. Honestly, the idea of having so many different accounts kind of stresses me out. So I've decided to do my own memberships. So I've created 2 tiers, VIP and MVP. And I've created a form with a 3-question survey, and I'll leave a link in the description. And the link is also in my About section on my YouTube homepage. If you would like to join, if you find my information helpful or interesting and would like to support my work, consider becoming a Dark Mystic 9 member. I plan to have monthly private YouTube lives where we can interact in a more direct way, as well as book and movie reviews. I just recently watched Free Guy, as Anne-Marie recommended to me, and I have a lot to say about that. Oh my goodness. So, but it'll be a space, an environment where we can really dive deep into a lot of these concepts, and you can get early access. And I'm considering as well, potentially, showing myself for the first time. I think that what we'll do is, because I'll start this towards the end of January, end of January, and I think we'll just see how the first one goes, and then the next one in February, perhaps. I was thinking of playing a sort of game where people essentially guess what I look like. What's my hair color? What's my eye color? And the person who maybe guesses the most right will, win some sort of prize. We'll just have fun, and we'll let the energy flow and direct us wherever it needs. So I'm really excited. I think it'll be fun and unique, and a chance to basically form a community of our own and really try to get to the bottom of cracking the code of the Matrix. So I've also updated my website. Also, I have PayPal now. And on my website, I'm also offering gift certificates. Please consider purchasing a gift card, especially for the holiday season. If you liked this video, please consider sharing, especially to any friends or family who are potentially freaking out about these drone sightings. Please check the description for books, articles, links, references, and the membership forum. And again, I have updated my About section to include all of my links, but please fill out the membership form first because it has specific instructions for each method because they all have nuances. By signing up on the membership form, you join my email list. I will send monthly reminders for membership updates. So thanks for watching. Please consider checking out my website listed here on the bottom, and have a great rest of your weekend.